no founder, like early stage founder, was telling things like, yeah, we start with Brazil, but we're global. Right now, that's most of the narrative that I
We have a lot of
hear.
examples.
Yeah, because you have a lot of examples, you have a lot of ambitions, you have people who understood that you can make money in tech. And that's a great opportunity for entrepreneurs.
Olá, pessoal, eu sou Fela Guimarães, host e fundadora do podcast Marketing Negócios. E, gente, eu tô chique. No meu segundo episódio internacional aqui com uma convidada também. E a gente vai começar a falar inglês aqui nesse episódio. Então fica aqui o convite para vocês assistirem, colocarem, né, a legenda caso precise, eu testar ali o inglês de vocês. My guest today has two things in common with me. We both have red hair. And we have our own podcast too. So I'm so excited to welcome Olga Maliskova, founder and host of the J Curve podcast. She's an investor who's deeply connected to the world of entrepreneurship in Latin America. Olga, welcome to our podcast. I'm so excited to be here with you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so let's talk about your podcast. Explain to us why the J curve. What's the meaning of that for the entrepreneurs? And why did you start the podcast?
So the J curve is a very well established phenomena in tech, right? It's the curve of growth of most of the tech companies who manage to make it. You start a company, you go down the death valley while you're trying to figure out the product market fit. Then if everything goes right, you get to product market fit, then you double down on growth and you start growing exponentially. And then after a certain period of time, most companies become complacent, rate of growth flattens, and the curve becomes flat. So that is very repeatable cycle that has existed in venture since forever. So since the podcast is largely about tech, ecosystem, investments, I thought that's a great way to name it. I was surprised that nobody used it for the podcast before, given that tech is such a huge area of growth in the United States and overall. And in terms of why the podcast has never been the goal, as building anything in creators space has never been the goal. However, my background is in venture capital, and it is in venture capital on global markets. And by the time when I moved to the US, which was in 2017, I went to Stanford in 2019. And while I was at GSB, I started to think seriously about the next big thing in tech because of this global perspective, I think I could see where opportunity is and where it isn't. And to me, US is a very interesting case of where opportunity isn't, specifically in venture capital, because the asset class is rapidly commoditizing, returns are diminishing, and the market is consolidating. So if you really want to start something innovative, starting itself, it's not like really hard. It's very easy. You have a lot of capital available, especially if you're part of GSB. But figuring out how to diversify and differentiate your thesis and not compete over margins, not compete in like red ocean over inflated valuations is extremely, extremely hard. That is one thing. But I think the second most important thing was that I come from emerging markets. I think that emerging markets represent tremendous opportunity for growth in tech and also represent a tremendous opportunity to do well and do good at the same time, which I think in any industry, intrinsic motivation matters more than financial motivation. And when you can combine those two things, that becomes like extra interesting. And when I started to look at emerging markets at that time, it was actually not that many backable markets when you think about it, because you have Middle East, where power law doesn't work. You have Central and Eastern Europe that is not backable at this point. You have certain markets in Asia, like India, for example, that is culturally really, really difficult and different. And you really need to have very strong local partners to be successful in that market. Then you have China, where power law doesn't work. and you have a very strong government control over tech sector. And then you have Africa, which is not emerged at all to the stage when you can collaborate with local players. There's no local tech ecosystem. Then you have Mexico, which is not really parallel market, very close to the US and very concentrated. And then you have Brazil, basically. And when you think about Brazil, in 2019, that was this perfect storm of capital flowing to the country and big companies emerging from the country. And I think this trend of capital and big companies emerging and seeing like fintechs growing faster than their benchmarks in the US, that was something that was really interesting for me as an outsider. Plus, Stanford is, Brazilians love Stanford. So half of my class were Brazilians.
I went there. We love Stanford.
So half of my class were Brazilians.
Yeah.
And when I started asking question about like what is happening in Brazil, like it's so interesting that suddenly there's like $5 billion is being deployed in the country.
Mhm.
And before that, probably in the last 10 years, like $100 million were deployed altogether. So those trends were interesting. And I started digging into Brazil, and I mean, all the reasons that we see, all the things that excite everybody about the market right now, like youth of the population, central bank policy, digital penetration, WhatsApp penetration, behavioral curiosity, entrepreneurial spirit, willingness to try everything and do it really relatively fast, and relatively mature local early stage tech ecosystem plus repeat talent and high quality universities. That was a very interesting long-term trend for me to think, okay, that is a market that is very backable in the next 10 years. And the stage of the market is as such that you can see like global companies emerging from here. The reason why I ended up building the podcast and not building a fund yet is because if you're an outsider and you don't speak the language, you have two problems, actually. The biggest problem is trust, because Brazil, as many emerging markets, is a low trust environment. And you need to figure out how to build your way into trust relatively fast, or else nobody will do business with you. But the second thing is access to deal flow. If you don't speak the language, you can do the strategy of syndicated deals with Kazakh, with Monashis, with Valor, and a lot of funds are doing that. But my background is in seed and early stage. And so I had to figure out the way to build access and build trust at the same time. And as you remember, there was a perfect storm for infrastructure on creators. So starting anything in content became extremely cheap. And because of COVID, Brazilians were willing to have conversations over Zoom, which was, by the way, not the case before COVID. Before COVID, everybody wanted to sit down and have a conversation. Next time you're in Sao Paulo, let's meet up.
Yes.
Let's not do the introductory calls over Zoom. So this like tailwinds from COVID and tailwinds in terms of creators ecosystem made podcasting a very lucrative option.
Yeah.
It's a long answer to your very short question.
But our podcast born this way in the pandemic, and it was a nice strategy for networking and connect with people from São Paulo, from Rio, and other places. And you've lived across different countries and spoke with founders all over the world in Latin America and Stanford as too. From your perspective, how do Brazilian entrepreneurs compare to others globally? I think my feeling is that we don't believe in ourselves compared to others that believe in us. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, Brazilians, nobody talks worse about Brazil than Brazilians, I have to say.
Totally, I agree.
It's an underdog mentality, and I understand it really well because I'm coming from Russia, but the benefit of my benefit is that I left Russia in 2011, and I spent most of my really active years in Singapore, UK, and US, which are very mature market where there's no underdog mentality at all. And underdog mentality is really hard to fight. By default, you're thinking that you are inferior. And there's nothing like nothing you can say or do to stop thinking this way, except for seeing more and more examples of people who build category defining, like top notch companies, and like being constantly exposed to this type of examples, those type of experiences. Then the mindset starts to shift a little bit. And we see that already. Actually, even in this like short period of time since I am exposed to the market. Like in 2019, no founder, like early stage founder, was telling things like, yeah, we started with Brazil, but we're global. Right now, that's most of the narrative that I
We have a lot of
hear.
examples.
Yeah, because you have a lot of examples, you have a lot of ambitions, you have people who understood that you can make money in tech. And that's a great opportunity for entrepreneurs. And you don't need to, like, entrepreneurship is not like exclusive to a certain club of expats, which was the first wave, right? The first wave of tech unicorns. Now it's like local founders who might not necessarily even go to the US schools, who understand the problems really well and are willing to take a risk, and they're doing that. So I think it is starting to change a little bit. Not fully, but a little bit. Now, in terms of how do you compare entrepreneurs from Brazil with other markets, it's actually a very interesting time to have this conversation because of the high interest rate environments. Because until high interest rate environments hit the world, the US Silicon Valley entrepreneurs were perceived as the top entrepreneurs in the world. Right now, it is changing. And it's very interesting how $5 billion, $7 billion, there's like $14-15 billion deployed during the top of the cycle in Brazil. And a lot of companies were very, very overfunded. And then, not recession, but downturn hit. And a lot of founders had to flip from this growth at all cost mindset to, okay, we need to be efficient mindset because we don't know when and if the next pool of capital comes. And the number of companies that recovered from hype in the downturn in Brazil proportionally is much higher than the number of companies who did the same thing in the US. Because in the US, what's the typical profile of a founder? You went to Stanford, you're a technical person, you raised money basically on campus in Coupa Cafe, you built some SaaS, and you scaled it as a SaaS. That's kind of the story. Like, you cannot do those things in Brazil. Like, there's no pure SaaS in Brazil. Brazil requires a very unique blend of operational savviness, technical knowledge, local understanding of the local domain, regulatory framework, taxes, labor law, all of those things, and tremendous level of resiliency because of these capital crunches that are constantly happening in the region. And I think this blend makes founders from here so much better positioned to survive and thrive in this high interest rate environment. And interest rates are not going down anytime soon anywhere at all. So I think it's definitely an edge. And you can see a lot of founders from here who are actively exercising that edge and are building like global companies. Some of the best funded fintechs come from Brazil, like eBanks, for example. Largest check of Advent International ever in any market comes from Brazil. So I think founders are much better positioned. Plus, this mindset shift towards we are not local, we can be global, and we should building as such. I think those two things represent tremendous tailwinds for LATAM and Brazil specifically to succeed on global markets in the next decade.
What is your perspective about the moment that we are today looking as a venture capital? You know, people are talking a lot about more profit, sustainable business. What is your vision about it?
Yeah, I think it's the best time to invest.
Yeah.
And across stages for different reasons. That growth is because you have, I mean, 10, 15, 20 companies, like Series B plus companies that have like $100 million in ARR and are either break even or profitable. Very high marginal businesses. or you have like $50 to $100 million ARR businesses, profitable and growing fast and leveraging regulatory environment, not just in fintechs, but in healthcare, for example, as well.
Yeah.
So that is one thing. So at growth, you can get into really good companies at a very attractive valuation because of capital crunches and scarcity of growth capital here. At early stage, you can see companies that leverage long-term tailwinds specific to Brazil. For example, efficiency, right? AI needs energy. Brazil has a lot of that. AI needs big markets with proprietary data, and Brazil has a lot of that. It's not an infrastructure play, but a lot of things on the application layer, they're already happening. And there are a lot of founders at the earlier stage who build specific use cases for those type of big problems where the data sets that you can accumulate in Brazil, they're extremely meaningful and important and substantial. Plus, you have fintech where you have like tremendous impact of AI on fraud prevention, on CX, on internal operations. So there's like all of these tailwinds that are being leveraged either at growth for efficiency and attractive valuation, or early stage with the scalable business models in mind and high relevance in the global context of AI growth.
And you've interviewed a lot of fast scaling startups and founders. What patterns do you notice among the ones that really succeed? And what are those game changing behaviors or mindsets that they all seem to have?
I mean, the first thing is like none of the companies here has been built overnight.
Yeah.
Most of the
That is the first
companies,
rule.
that is the first thing. Most of the companies that I interviewed, they started in 2011, 12, 13, 14, 15, maybe 17. But very rarely you kind of suddenly, I mean, there's Canastra that's growing pretty fast. It was started like much later. But the common pattern is that you actually had to scale this business for a decade before it became like relevant or known, because you have like PicPay on this market that hit $1 billion in revenue last year, will triple the growth in the next 3 to 5 years. They launched in 2012. You have eBanks, same thing, launched in 2012. You have Quintandar launched a little bit later than that. Nubank launched like also. It's like there was this time, like 2012, 2014, 15, when a lot of those companies were launched. So the rule number one is that it's not overnight. It takes a decade, and it takes this building this operational muscle to survive across very different market environments. That's one thing, I think. The second thing, ridiculously, but there's a huge contribution of luck in my perspective, because, you know, Nubank, Stone, like all of those guys, they would never be able to hit the scale like Stone go public, like Nubank became one of the most valuable fintechs outside Asia if you didn't have central bank policies the way it existed and it exists in the US and in here in Brazil. Like it would never work. So luck was also very important. So getting lucky has to be number two.
Yeah, like this is so important too.
It is, and it's funny, like because you can never optimize for that, but when it happens, it happens.
And people never say about it. Like it's all the rules, but they don't talk about the lucky that is something important in entrepreneurship.
It's extremely important. Luck, timing, ability to just grind through years. I think this is very important. But I think the most important thing is because capital has always been scarce, I don't think anyone, when they launched the companies in 2012, 15, they were like, okay, what are the metrics what is the traction that we need to achieve to raise Series A? That was not the thinking. And because it was not the thinking, majority of those businesses that were built have always been profitable. And when you are always profitable, it allows you to have a tremendous negotiation leverage when you raise capital, and you can decide which capital you're going to raise. And you see that like Mubadala Capital did their first ever tech investment in the world in Brazil in a company called Circ. You see Bond Capital, Mary Maker's fund, doing like companies like CRM Bonus, for example, which is not even like hardcore tech company, loyalty business specific to Brazil, but huge market opportunity because of their rate of growth. You can have, Advent, $500 million deployed in eBank's largest ever tech investment, and first and the largest ever tech investment of Advent. So that those type of deals can only happen if you have negotiation leverage. Negotiation leverage comes with performance and profitability. So those are, I think, three things, like ability to grind, luck, timing, and optimizing for long-term sustainable growth, and not the fundraising.
Great. It's a checklist.
Yes, absolutely.
Olga, what lessons did you learn about networking? Yeah, about with different cultures.
Well, first of all, Brazil has any flavor of culture you would like because of the diversity of the population. Like largest population of Japanese outside Japan, Italians outside Italy. And in general, anyone can be a Brazilian, which is the beauty of Brazil. Like as long as you speak Portuguese. So any flavor. Networking, I think the biggest thing about networking is that there's no such thing as networking. Like if you really want to have strong partnerships, you build a community, you don't build a network. And it's very different. Network, it is like slightly transactional term. And in a market like Brazil, where everything is relationship driven, transactional approach doesn't work. And I think that's the reason why, for example, Chinese companies here are more successful than US companies. Because US, like I live in New York, if I think, okay, this makes sense for you from business perspective, it makes sense for me from business perspective, I don't even need to meet with the person for coffee. Like it's fine. It's a transaction. It's win-win value. Let's go. And it's not like that in Brazil. No. Even if it makes a lot of sense, even if it delivers tremendous
a lot of calls and meetings,
you have to you gotta go for dinners, spend some time together, understanding do I like you? Do I like you? Do I want to work with you? Do I feel comfortable having a conversation with you? So community. And community builds with time, for sure.
Yeah. Well, about raising the next generation, you have 3 kids, right?
I do.
What are some of the lessons you try to share with your daughters or with other women building their own paths, Também?
Lead by example. Like the single most important lesson you can ever share is you gotta put your, brain, your mind, your capital where your mouth is, and be transparent about what it takes. Right. I think that's the most important lesson you can teach kids.
Agreed. Well, to wrap up, I ask all my guests from podcast, what's the best and the worst piece of advice you've ever received?
The best piece of advice I received was from my professor, Jeffrey Pfeffer, who said that you need to take these dreams, ambitions, knowledge, connections that you've built in Stanford and bring them as far away as you can. And that would be the best contribution to this respected institution. And I think that's one of the big reasons why I am here, for example. It was hard to think where further I can bring it from Stanford, to be quite honest. The worst piece of advice I've ever received. Yeah, this is interesting because some people say you got to be doing what you're good at, which I think it getting misinterpreted on the market because sometimes you don't know what you're good at. Because normally when you think about good at, you think about some hardcore skills, or I'm good at coding, or I'm good at math. And a lot of people choose to pursue professions based on this perception of being good at it being some sort of the hard skills. But being good at, in most cases, is being good at figuring out what muscle you need to build to pursue things that you have very strong gut feelings about. And I think a lot of people don't really understand that.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Yeah, I agree with that. Olga, thank you so much for
thank
being
you.
here. It was really nice. I'm such a fan of Stanford because I went there. I was an intern in a MBA program that it was in 2018. I'm 26 years old today. It was such a good and a dream come true, you know, and Stanford inspired me a lot. I know that it inspired you too. So I'm so happy to be here with you talking about innovation, talking about startups and entrepreneurship. I think that Brazilians and entrepreneurs um, have to understand their value. So it's nice to have you here and talking about it. So it's nice to be an entrepreneur and as a woman talking about it. So thank you so much for being
Thank you.
here.
Thank you for having me. It was a
And
pleasure.
accept our invite, right?
Sure. Like with greatest pleasure. Thank you.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. Pessoal, obrigada por acompanhar o episódio. Fica aqui o convite para vocês acompanharem a Olga. Os links vão estar aqui na descrição do episódio. E até o próximo conteúdo.